Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Tina Holland. I'm the Executive Vice President and Provost at Holy Cross College here in Notre Dame, Indiana. And it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce our distinguished speaker this morning. This is Mr. Jim Towey. He's the immediate past president at St. Vincent College in Pennsylvania. And there he launched several notable initiatives that significantly elevated the college's status and reputation among the nation's top liberal arts schools. While at St. Vincent, he appeared on a number of network and cable television programs, and he's published pieces in the Wall Street Journal, in USA Today, and the National Review. Mr. Towey was a member of President George W. Bush's senior staff and served as director of the White House Office for Faith-Based and Community Initiatives. He also served for 12 years as legal counsel to Mother Teresa, and it was at her urging that he founded Aging with Dignity, a nonprofit organization that helps families plan end-of-life care. Mr. Towey earned his Bachelor of Science degree from Florida State University and his law degree from Florida State University College of Law. He is the recipient of numerous awards, including 6 honorary doctorate degrees, and he lives with his wife and 5 children in the Washington, D.C. area. So with that, let us welcome Mr. Jim Towey.
Thank you, Tina, for the very nice introduction. And I want to thank Dave Solomon for his warm hospitality during my time here at Notre Dame, as well as Elizabeth Kirk and Greer Hannon and all those who made it possible for me to be here. Very happy to be back on the campus of Notre Dame. I've got a lot of friends in the Notre Dame community. Dr. Tish Kelly Holmes is here, who I've known for 20-some years. She's a great, not only as a medical professional, but also merging the medical and spiritual together. And then one of my former students at St. Vincent College. Where's Mary Sherman? Is she Mary here? Did she skip out? There she is in the back. Hey, Mary. So it's good to have a little St. Vincent here on the Notre Dame campus. As Tina mentioned, my wife and I have 5 children. We have 4 boys that are 17, 16, 14, and 10. And then we have a little girl, actually a goddess, who is 7. And so I called back to Maryland this morning to check in with Mary as they were heading out to school, and the kids didn't want to get out of bed. They hadn't done their homework last night. The dishes were still in the sink, and so it's great to be here at Notre Dame and to have time with you. And I'm happy to come back on any occasion until they're out of the house. I told them that I was participating. I showed them the materials, on the conference Younger Than Sin, Retrieving Simplicity, and then the kids started, I heard my one son, they said, "Where's Dad going?" He said, "He's going to a sin conference." So they wanted to come. But my oldest son, by the way, is applying. He's a senior in high school now. He's applying to Notre Dame. So if anyone's here from the admissions office, in February, we have this beach house in Florida, which you are more than welcome to utilize if that works out for you. Look, I know last night to be here was very humbling to hear fathers speak last night with such acumen and insight, wisdom. I'm not burdened with that intellect, nor with the sin of curiosity. So I will not be able to match that. I realize that the only reason I was invited to come to this conference by Dr. Solomon was because of my long-standing friendship and long-time working relationship with a modern-day saint, George W. Bush. So, just seeing if you're listening there. But I was happy actually to see him back in the public eye, plugging his book last week and mangling the English language. But I'm going to talk a little bit about my friend Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Dr. Paul Wright, who had provided some medical care for Mother, and her heart care is here this morning, and some of you may have met Mother in her lifetime, and she was truly extraordinary. And it's appropriate that I speak in this centennial celebration of her birth, that she was born 100 years ago And I don't know if you saw the coverage when they unveiled the new postage stamp in Washington, and also the new commemorative Time Magazine edition on her life. They're here 13 years after her death, and they're still writing about her and talking about her. And so I want to start my presentation this morning with a trivia question, which is, as you may know, of course, Mother Teresa was a frequent visitor to the United States and opened dozens of homes in America. But what was the first city she ever stepped in America? Anyone know? First place where she ever publicly spoke? The answer is Las Vegas, believe it or not. Las Vegas. She loved the roulette wheel. No, I'm kidding. She was invited to come and address the National Council Catholic Women's Group, NCCW, and gave her first American speech there in 1967. So if you want to follow in Mother's footsteps in the centennial year, you can make a pilgrimage to Las Vegas. And, if you're married, tell your spouse, it's the will of God that you go and you get the plenary indulgence and free drinks. Not many places you can do that. But she was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. She was a friend of so many U.S. presidents. She was voted the most admired woman of the 20th century, and I had the privilege to attend her funeral in 1997 in Calcutta, and to watch the procession of presidents and prime ministers and princes and other leaders of their countries coming there to pay their respects to an extraordinary woman. So what was it about Mother Teresa's life that made her so loved by the world? And why do I think that her influence in the 21st century and beyond will be much greater than it was in her lifetime? When I looked at the conference where the focus is on humility and wonder and joy, it's apt, I think, to think of those virtues and to think of Mother Teresa, because she really was a living testimony to humility, to littleness, to wonder, to her total awareness of God's presence in the day-to-day moments of her life, and also that joy, that cheerfulness, which is actually one of the charisms of the missionaries of charity. So what I think I'm going to do is center my remarks on 3 observations about Mother Teresa's life, and then I'm happy to spend. I would love to have a lot of time for question and answer, so I'm only going to go till about 11:35 or so. And that'll give us time, at least a half hour for around a half hour for Q&A. The very first characteristic or aspect of Mother's life is a very obvious one, but I think it's important to have some focus on it, particularly for Catholics, which is that Mother was fully human. Mother Teresa was fully human. I think Catholics in particular have a way of turning saints into plastic statues or into little plaster statues and ascribe to them certain ethereal qualities and in some ways spiritualize the different aspects of their lives. And then in the process, we then dismiss them as kind of irrelevant to our own life because they're made of some type of substance or stuff different from our own. And I think that lets us off the hook. That's why I think it's a little dangerous. Because I think Mother was a saint not because she had some supersized dose of sanctity and holiness injected into her life, but because she embraced her humanity, her littleness. And through the little things of life, she found her sanctity. Of course, she was an extraordinary person, very gifted. She was an extraordinary leader and decision maker. When I'd be in meetings with her, it was always impressive to me to see how she could size up issues and the wisdom that she would apply to different situations and timing and tone and all the different dimensions of decision making. And I think that she not only is a good decision maker and all the different gifts that she had, the charisma that she had, but there are many people in the world that are very gifted and that are charismatic. There was something, though, about what she did with those gifts and how she chose the good over and over and how she cooperated with the Holy Spirit. But I want to start really talking about just her humanity, her humanness. Mother never went to college, but she may have been one of the smartest people I ever met. She loved poetry and music and art. When she would be hospitalized, she'd write poetry. I can remember her voice in the chapel singing, this melodious voice, singing always a little bit below the other sisters. But she loved to sing, and she loved the beauty of life. You would see her when I'd be driving her, looking out the window at sunsets or sunrises or the autumnal glory when she'd be in the U.S. in the fall, things that she would not see in Calcutta. She even learned how to love the crows that perch outside of her office there in the mother house, squawking all day long. She learned how to find their beauty, these ugly, annoying nuisances of crows. Mother Teresa loved chocolate ice cream. She loved her nuns. You know, those women were her daughters. She loved them. She missed them. When she was away from them, she felt a real longing to see them again. Many times I'd see Mother as she would arrive in a city, and that reunion, that joy, that celebration of communion and humanity was so impressive, how she really drew strength from those relationships, that she found meaning in life from those relationships. And I can remember at times at the end of the day, if I drove her to her convent and I'd be seated outside in the kind of the anteroom, separated by the curtain where the sisters were on the other side of the cloister, and I'd be eating dinner and they would be in there, and I couldn't hear what Mother was saying except I could hear the hum of her voice. Then I would hear squeals of laughter. Mother loved to laugh. She loved to laugh. She loved a good laugh. She loved a good prank. These things are important, I think, because to really enter into her life, you have to see that these were critical dimensions to the sanctity she forged through much suffering, because it's true that her life was characterized by a great deal of physical pain and infirmity. I can remember toward the end of her life when you would travel with her, just the back pain she had was so tremendous. And she would take pain medicine for it. But she took a lot of medicine for her heart. She took a lot of, she recognized that she needed medical care. She was a terrible patient. She did not, Paul laughs, she did not like to be at the doctor's office. She often went out of deference to the wishes of her sisters. She never wanted to be there. When she was sick in Calcutta one time when I was there in the hospital, she pulled me and Sandy McMurtry, her close friend, aside, and she said, "Can you get me out of here?" And I'm picturing what happens if I smuggle Mother out of, I'd still be in a Calcutta jail. But as she aged, not unlike John Paul II, although their infirmities were different, it was a very public embrace of her aging in that season in her life. And she became confused easily at times. And I raise it to just simply say that in the midst of that suffering and joy, she chose to follow Jesus. And during good times and bad, sickness and health, until death. I was asked at the end of Mother's life how I would describe her, and I was always thinking of how it was said of St. Francis of Assisi that he was the most Christ-like person since Christ. And I felt Mother Teresa was the most Mary-like person since Mary. And when you think about her life, she was virgin and mother to the world, really. I see some of our religious here that live out the fecundity of their vocation through their motherly love, through the tenderness, through the compassion that they showed. And I think what was particularly of interest to those of us who love Mother were the revelations which came out after she passed away, when they began the process of the cause for beatification and started contacting those of us that had letters from her to turn them in. And a number of her spiritual directors did. And when they turned in the letters, you began to see an entirely different dimension to Mother, because we all saw how her life was saddled with physical hardship and mortification. But we thought she was getting these unique spiritual consolations, that she was in some ways being nurtured and fed by the angels that allowed her to live such a mortified life, with malaria dozens of times and with all the privation that you see in places like Calcutta and other places where she lived. But to find out that in fact, and I don't know if you saw this book when it came out, Mother Teresa, Come Be My Light, which is a collection of a lot of these letters. I want to read just a brief passage from one of these, and I want to thank Tish for bringing this book by so that I could do this. But this is a letter that she wrote to one of the Archbishop of Calcutta's in her correspondence back and forth with him. And she writes, Your Grace, I want to say to you something, but I don't know how to express it. I am longing, with a painful longing, to be all for God, to be holy in such a way that Jesus can live his life to the full in me. The more I want him, the less I am wanted. I want to love him as he has not been loved, and yet there is that separation, that terrible emptiness, that feeling of absence of God. For more than 4 years, I find no help in the direction of, and she mentions her spiritual director, yet I obey him blindly. Often I've gone to the confessional with the hope of speaking, and yet nothing comes. To read about this is to kind of glimpse into her loveliness, that was at the 4-year mark. In fact, she spent the rest of her life that way, with the exception of about a 9-day period. She felt nothing but the darkness. And it's you can say, well, then if God loved her so much, why did he abandon her? Why that sense of emptiness and separation? Of course, to raise that question is to answer it, because the words of Christ ring out, my God, why have you forsaken me? For the poor to whom she ministered, she was sharing in that sense of abandonment, that sense of exile, of irrelevance. She was entering into their destitution, their spiritual destitution. I remember when Mother was asked one time what the worst disease was that she had ever seen. Was it leprosy or was it AIDS? She said no, it was loneliness. It was that terrible feeling of being unloved and unwanted and unwelcome, a feeling that you'll see on this campus. When I was college president, amazing to me to see some of our students who felt so alone. Maybe they'd come from a troubled home and then arrived on a campus where they didn't fit in or they didn't find welcome. And here they were surrounded at a Catholic college by all these wonderful students, and they were starving for friendship, for that bread of friendship. Mother understood that in her work, that this terrible destitution of her poor, she used to describe as Jesus in his distressing disguise of the poorest of the poor. And I think it's very relevant for us in our modern age to ponder Mother's life and to recognize that this disease of loneliness is going to be very, very much front and center in this century. When you look at the United States and Western Europe, and you look at Japan and other countries, you see this extraordinary, unprecedented phenomenon of an age wave, where we now have about 36 million senior citizens in America. But the baby boomer complement of 78 million people will be entering the retirement stream. And I think it's going to pose unprecedented challenges for our country and for our world, not only in terms of material questions, but spiritually. What do we do with this horde of lonely people? When I founded Aging with Dignity, I would often find myself going to nursing homes and assisted living facilities. And I would always stop at the entrance point where the receptionist was, and I'd say, let me ask you, of the residents you have here in this facility, how many of them ever have visitors? Ever? The answer was always about this, half, about half. So you have in these facilities these individuals who don't know the warmth of human company, have no one that comes to affirm their God-given human dignity, that sense that their life matters, that they're not a burden to us, that their life is a gift to us. And I think that Mother Teresa recognized that while she gave food to those who were hungry, she knew that their hearts were hungering for that connection of communion, of fellowship, and that she combated that loneliness and inspired others to reach out and help those who were alone. So that's why I think she has an important lesson to teach the world as it ages, and about the importance, the primacy really, of those individuals' right to age with dignity. My second point is related to the first point about Mother Teresa, which is that Mother Teresa really nurtured her humanity by the discipline of her prayer life. She used to say that if you're too busy to pray, you're too busy. And this was an admonition that applied to people at different seasons in their lives, college students running around so busy. Everyone has an excuse for avoiding the discipline of a prayer life, but she was tremendously devoted to her prayer life. She also recognized, and she would say often, that it was in the silence of the heart that God would speak. Of course, in this century, where all of our technological gadgets often divert us from attending to our life of prayer, and in fact bombard our lives with noise and chatter, we find our lives challenged by this phenomenon. And with texting and emails and iPods and iPads and tweets and, of course, the ever-present cell phone, where do we find time in the midst of the noise and electronic overload to be present to Almighty God and to receive and to speak and to listen and to talk with our Lord? And, of course, Mother, I think, taught us that was really almost a human right, the right to contemplate. Of course, to those college students here today, one of the most important parts of your intellectual journey is that right to contemplate, to ponder, to celebrate wonder that's around you, to begin to ask him very important questions about the direction of your life and where you're headed. Very important, I think, to find time for that. And of course, Mother was a very busy person running a worldwide missionary order in 130 countries with not a single computer. To this day, not a single computer. And so she had many things to deal with, and yet there she was finding time for adoration, of course Mass, of course spiritual reading. I remember one time when I was flying with her on a little plane. There were 5 of us on this tiny plane. And 2 of her sisters, Sandy McMurtry, a priest, and myself. And we were going up, and in the climb out, we hit wickedly bad weather. And if you've ever been in a little tiny plane, when it's being thrown about in this kind of weather, it's frightening. So I'm sitting there going, oh gosh, what's going on? And I look over at Mother there, and she's just looking out the little window of the plane. She has a rosary in her hand. She is as peaceful as can be, just looking out the window peacefully. And of course, in contrast to myself, and of course I'm looking at Mother going, I know you're ready to go. You know? Of course, then I thought, if that plane goes down and we get to St. Peter's, I'm going to go, I'm with her, party of 6. Her table. One up front, that one. But she had, for her, prayer was a matter of first resort, not last resort. You see, so many people in a time of crisis are furiously praying, trying to establish a relationship. It's like furiously watering a plant sometimes. Of course, the mercy of God can mend all of this, but truly prayer is seen as a process of growth, as a process of relationship. Mother understood that well. When she was in her hospital bed, one time she was intubated, and she reached for this little scrap of paper, which they've now got on display in Calcutta, and she wrote on it, I want Jesus, 297115. She was giving the phone number of the Mother House. She wanted them to bring her Holy Communion. I mean, this was her hunger. This was, I think, too, just the natural consequence of a life devoted to prayer. And what I think is also was important about that period in her life was that the sisters were watching her example. They were watching her as she aged. They were watching her as she lost some of her capacity to decide matters with just such assurance, confident assurance. They were watching her prayerfulness. It was really evangelical. And I think that sometimes parents think, well, my formation of my children really ends when they leave home. And in reality, it's often your formation of your adult children who have children, who are watching you age, who are watching you approach medical questions about your life, who are watching you deal with the aches and pains of your life and the existential concerns you have about eternity and about death and all of the different things that we see in Christ's life as we imitate him. I think Mother taught us a lot about how to be part of that new evangelization through infirmity, through old age, which her friend John Paul II pioneered. When Mother Teresa was coming to America, my wife Mary was pregnant with our third child. And so we were living in Florida, but we wanted to see her so she could bless our baby. So Mary and I flew up to Washington for the day. When we got to the Gift of Peace home, Mother came out to the foyer and she's like, "Oh, Mary, you're pregnant. When are you due?" And Mary said, "Well, I'm due August 8th, but I think I'm going to be early because we just had Joe." And Mother said, "No, you're going to have that baby on my birthday." And I said, "Mother, I hope not, because your birthday's August 26th. So if Mary's 18 days late, my life's going to be a living heck." And so to make a long story short, night of August 25th, Mary goes into labor. We're like, "Oh my gosh, Mother was right. We're going to have a little girl. We're going to name her Teresa." Midnight strikes, 1:20 in the morning. Out comes the baby, and the doctor says, "Congratulations, you have a little boy." And Mary said, "Are you sure?" And they said, "Yeah, here's how we tell. This is med school. This is what they teach us in med school." But 2 days later, we got a call from Calcutta, and the sister said, "Can you get back here because we don't think Mother's going to make it." And so I talked to Mary, and my mom came over, and Mary gave me, she said, "Take this photo of little Maximilian to Mother. She'll be so happy that he was born on her birthday." So I flew to Calcutta. When I arrived in Calcutta there with Sandy McMurtry, the sisters met us at the airport, and they said, "We probably should go straight to the hospital because she's back on oxygen." So we went to the hospital, and when I arrived there, and I'll never forget this, the sisters were all abuzz. And I was thinking, what's up? I said, Sister, what's up? She goes, "Well, Mother was just laying there, and she was pointing up like this." And the sisters were looking up. Was she having a vision? Was there an insect in the room she was pointing? They were trying to figure out, what is she pointing at? And then Mother, seeing their confusion, took her oxygen mask, and she moved it to the side of her face, and she said, "I'm going home. I'm going home to God." And I've thought a lot about that for what it means in the 21st century, that little cry of mothers from the hospital. And it's true that in this age where you hear Jesus' words to Martha, "Martha, you're anxious and worried about many things." And it's true, many of our young people today live in a very anxious and worried world. You see the signals from the media that's so negative, and it's so, this generation's going to have it worse than the one that's there now for the first time, and all of these different material concerns, and then there's the North Korea and the nuclear, all these anxieties that are starting to penetrate around. And I think in that kind of environment, there was Mother Teresa teaching us about bearings, about a compass. She knew where she came from, that she had come from God, and that she was going home to God. And while that sounds elemental, in fact, to our understanding of our faith and to those virtues of humility, wonder, and joy, it's critical to ponder that thought. And finally, I want to say a little bit about Mother Teresa's compassion in action and what she can teach us. I'm wary of people that are pro-life that aren't pro-poor, that love God but don't love people. And the beauty of Mother was, and you probably will remember her pro-life address at the National Prayer Breakfast, where she was fearless and unflinching but loving in stating her views on the defense of unborn life. She, of course, lived her life, too, with many at every different phase in the continuum of life. And I think the world thinks a lot about Mother Teresa's compassion. And I met Mother Teresa the week that she turned 75 years old. And that week in 1985, I met her August 20th, 1985. And I really saw the fecundity of her life in those last 12 years. In a season in life where we often write off our senior citizens saying they have nothing to contribute, when in fact, one could argue, and I think the church may say this at some point, that those were some of the most important years of her life and her teaching. Because there was a growing sense of holiness to her life that comes with a life that's faithful. And I, when I worked at the White House, because seeing Mother Teresa, she was around the poor, and they really were, it's so connected to her life, her compassion, to be with them. It was a privilege to see her with, I remember standing there, she was at an AIDS patient's bedside, just rubbing his chest and looking deeply in his eyes and talking to him by name and just smothering him with love as he suffered. And to see that compassion in action. And then contrasting it, when I was at the White House, I would park my little car on the side of the West Wing, my little 2001 Honda Civic, and walk in there, and you're around a lot of powerful people. You're around a lot of powerful people. But it's been my observation in life, and I truly learned this from Mother, that the most powerful people are the poor. At least they were in my life. Because they have the power to unleash mercy in the world and love in the world. They have a way of setting us into right relation with others, where we don't put the poor on a pedestal and we don't dismiss them to the margins of life, but we relate to them. And not just the materially poor, the spiritually poor as well. Not to say that as an escape from the materially poor, but to recognize they're one and the same. That poverty is found in the cross, that it's found many ways in sin that's been redeemed. And so I think that Mother Teresa's, taught us a lot about the need we have for the poor. When you read that beautiful parable of the rich man and Lazarus, and I lived with the Missionaries of Charity for 1 year along the border of U.S. and Mexico, and would drive 1 day a week across into La Jolla to get hundreds of loaves of bread to bring into Mexico. So you would go from the highest point of the first world to radical poverty. I remember a child being brought to the seminary there that was a little over a year old that had died of bronchitis. Just a little baby that died of bronchitis. And there's the mother standing there with this baby who died for want of a little bit of medical care. So it was a very intense experience. And then I was praying that Luke 16 the whole year, of that rich, that in many ways that man laying at the gate had the keys to heaven in his pocket if the man had only come to know him. That there was an invitation to relationship. That he was at the gate of his life. He wouldn't let him in. He was afraid of the relationship, terrified of it. My friend Jean Vanier, who spent his life living with the handicapped and started the L'Arche movement. And if you haven't read any of Jean Vanier, V-A-N-I-E-R, well worth reading his insights about these questions of connectedness and relationship and finding Christ in these relationships of mutuality. Mother Teresa lived this. She was, of course, friends with Jean, and when Jean opened a home in Calcutta, and they were kindred spirits in many ways. But Mother recognized that was worship. She used to, I remember one time taking Janet Reno's hand and just taking the 5 fingers, "You did it to me." And reminding, she said that this is, whatever you did you did it to me. That kind gesture, the bread of friendship to somebody in the cafeteria, that somebody on my floor in the dorm, you did it to me. If you spent time with them, you spent time with me. Very deep teaching, I think, for our age. I want to close with the last time I saw Mother and a story about it, because it's left me thinking about life a lot. It was 10 weeks before she died. It was in June of 1997. And at this point in her life, Mother was in a wheelchair because of all the sicknesses she'd had. She'd broken so many bones in her bodies from falls. She was just worn out. And so Mary and I knew she was coming to Washington and New York, and so we loaded up the kids in the van and followed her around like a little puppy to these different spots and to see her as much as we could. And I remember us going to the Bronx, where I was meeting with Mother in her headquarters there on East 145th Street on the 3rd floor. And Mary and the kids were outside. And I was trying to delay all the discussions I was having with her because I knew I was never going to see her again. So I was trying to stretch out the meeting. And one sister came up behind the wheelchair and put their hands on the wheelchair, her hands on the wheelchair to signal it was time for Mother to lay down and for me to leave. And so I said, Mother, before you go, Mary and the kids are down in the courtyard. Can they come up for your blessing? Before I could finish my request, Mother had jumped up from the wheelchair and looked out the window and she said, "Where are the children? Where are the children?" And I've thought about that, and I thought, wow, this is the fruit of a life lived for others. This is the fruit of a life lived for others. She had such a childlike heart, that humility, that littleness that we heard addressed so eloquently last night. That really is the common thread uniting the saints in heaven, the communion of saints, that humility. Enter through the narrow gate. A beautiful reminder for us that type of sanctity was forged through relationships where she simply loved. As she said, love until it hurts. Love until it hurts. But that she had such a childlike heart at the end that she wanted to play with children. It's been said that nobody at the end of life ever says, "I wish I had spent more time in the office." And I think that's true, or more time in faculty meetings. I'm sure that's true. But I'll tell you what else is people never say at the end of life. You'll never say, I wish I hadn't volunteered so much. I wish I hadn't gone to Mass so much. I wish I hadn't visited shut-ins or gone out to that nursing home and befriended one person and just walked with them as they were journeying. I wish I hadn't, forgiven so much. Mother Teresa lived so fully present to the day-to-day wonder of life. What was God going to provide today? Medicines that would be brought, completely out of the blue that were exactly what she needed for individuals that were sick. She lived in the wonder of the day. And she loved with that childlike heart. And through that, I think her selfless acts that really made her fully human. Because it is through selfless acts, I think, Mother teaches us that you become fully human. And through her discipline to prayer, that her life became something beautiful for God, and I think will be providing us lasting lessons for many years to come. So I'm now at 11:31, and which is leaving us a lot of time for questions and answers. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about Mother Teresa, President Bush, or my hairdresser.
Thank you very much, Jim, and hold off on the questions about the hairdresser. That's my secret. He's going to share. Go ahead and approach either of the two microphones that are standing here at these two corners, and the floor is open for questions.
Jim, thank you for your talk. I think you would give Jay Leno some competition. One comment, I was very surprised to learn that she first spoke in Las Vegas. One of my aunts had flown out to California with a family once because one of her granddaughters was in a parade for the Rose Bowl. And on the way home, sadly, she had a heart attack on the plane, but they landed in Las Vegas, so her death certificate reads Las Vegas. It's been a family joke ever since then that good old Aunt Fern would be the only one to pull off a stunt like that. What I was wondering if you would go back on your comments about her prayer life, because I have read that was very difficult for her. That as you read sometimes in St. John of the Cross and a number of the great saints, that prayer was very dry. They did not find in it the solace and the comfort that they had hoped to find, and that maybe that's because God is not so much withdrawing from us, but we have to learn how far we are from God, and that the dryness is not because we're being punished, but God is calling us into an even deeper relationship. I don't know if you'd comment about that in her life.
Sure. Well, Mother I was just with her sisters in Mexico looking at they have some displays there, Mother Teresa Center, and they had a bunch of the book. I said, show me the books that Mother used to read. And it was amazing to just see row after row of these books that Mother would read that nurtured her prayer life. She was very disciplined. And as I said in my remarks, we didn't know that she had this terrible desert going on inside of her. We thought the angels were whispering sweet nothings in her ear. But that did not stop her. And I think what will happen with some people is they then cease adoration. They don't feel anything. Because the Lord has withdrawn his sensible presence, they have a feeling he's not there. They take that I fled him down the nights and down the days, the hound of heaven, and they kind of reverse it. He fled me down the nights and down the days. He ran from me, and so they were chasing, in a sense, that face of God. But we never knew it. And her smile often covered a lot of this because she felt that she grew to appreciate. In fact, and it's funny you say, because this is the other letter I marked. She said that she goes, Dear Father, this is a letter that's in response, really. I can't express in words the gratitude I owe for your kindness to me. For the first time in 11 years, now this is after 11 years of nothing but desert and desolation. For the first time in 11 years, I've come to love the darkness. For I believe now that it is a very small part, of Jesus' darkness and pain on earth. You have taught me to accept it as a spiritual side of your work as you write. Today, really, I feel a deep joy that Jesus can't go any more through the agony, but that he wants to go through it in me. More than ever, I surrender myself to him, yes, more than ever. And she in some of her letters, she talked about going into the dark holes. The dark holes. And if you ever go to Calcutta, and Katie Sherman went with me. I took 12 students every year, the last 4 years. When you go around Calcutta, you'll see these miserable dwellings, and they really are dark holes. There's no electricity in them. There's just a little opening there, and families live in there. And I think that also became in a way where she found her spirit, to understand that phenomenon of her encountering Christ there, she herself had to know that darkness in her own life. So she was very disciplined she loved the rosary. She prayed the rosary faithfully. It was in her hand at every Mass to remind her to pray with Our Lady. She had a tremendous confidence in Our Lady. Many people said at the end of her life, she lost her faith. Time magazine, did Mother Teresa lose her faith? Kind of story. I remember in her hospital room, she had the Blessed Sacrament right across from her. She had an icon of Our Lady of Guadalupe there. She had this image of the little flower right next to her bed where she died, right on the wall, this beautiful image of the little flower, photograph of the little flower. She was very devotional, and yet she recognized that, and I think she grew in her spiritual maturity to understand why it was that she was not going to have those consolations. The last thing I want to say is, to understand how painful it was for her, you had to understand that at the very beginning of her work, and she described in these letters, she had these incredible conversations with Jesus and images, 3 different visions and conversations with Jesus that will line up with Margaret Mary and other saints who had similar revelations. I know Mother Teresa, there are many that knew her better than I did, but I knew her well enough and observed her over 12 years, getting to be with her plenty. She would never make that stuff up. Under pain of death, she would never write something like that if it didn't happen. And that's enough for me to know that she had those conversations with our Lord, that he had those visions, to go do something as improbable as a woman going and living on the streets with the poor in 1946 in Calcutta. It was insane. So I think because she had such high mystical, exalted moments, that depth of poverty, of the withdrawal, had to be painful for her.
Another question.
Thank you. You made reference to the 1994 prayer breakfast address, and I have a picture in my mind who would have been in that crowd for that remarkable speech. And I occasionally have students who are very unhappy with how they're going to come to terms with the abortion questions and the issues, and I'll say, well, have you read this? And I give them this text of this speech, and the shock and awe value of that speech is still very much there. What I've never heard anybody say anything about is how did that crowd there that day respond to her in the immediate aftermath of her making that speech?
That was in February of 1994, and that was the first time that she met President and Mrs. Clinton. And she met them afterwards because they had her in a different hold before the speech than they had the President and First Lady. When she came out and spoke and gave her address, and she read that, she was 84, almost 84 when she gave the speech. She spent a lot of time preparing those remarks and had some individuals advising her. When she delivered them, with President Clinton and Mrs. Clinton on one side, and Vice President Gore and Mrs. Gore, and and the whole ballroom, it got very quiet. And then there were people standing on their feet clapping, but the kind of clapping was like in your face, Clinton. So there was a little of that going on, where there was a little gamesmanship, where people were like, "Take that, you SOB." Mother didn't deliver it that way, but she delivered it unflinchingly. She felt very strongly that she needed to give that speech and say what she said and accept whatever consequences came. But interestingly enough, within 2 years, she and Mrs. Clinton were opening a home for pregnant women to deliver their babies and to have them adopted. And so we worked on that home, and I was there that day and watching her with Mrs. Clinton walking around the house and Mayor Marion Barry there. It was surreal. But that was Mother, and she would often, she had a love for Mrs. Clinton. She didn't, I don't recall her talking to me much about President Clinton, but she had a real respect for Mrs. Clinton, and she sent her, letters, and Mrs. Clinton went to her, and Mrs. Clinton led the U.S. delegation to her funeral. So, but that day, there was, besides the kind of applause that was meant to taunt, there was also, I think, from a lot of people there, just a certain sense of wonder that Mother Teresa was giving that speech with the leader of the free world sitting right there, being scolded. And all I remember, the last thing I remember from it was President Clinton kept drawing on this coffee cup that was empty. So you kept seeing him pulling it up because she just stayed on that. When you read the speech, she stays on it for a few minutes, and he just kept pulling the cup up. I'm thinking, it's empty, Bill.
Go ahead, young man.
Thank you, Mr. Towey, for your time today, for your remarks.
What's your name?
John.
You a student here?
No, I go to the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota.
Good school. My dad went there.
I had a question for you about your time with Mother Teresa, and maybe if you could talk about how that's impacted your life, and maybe how that's impacted how you approach your relationships with people. I'm sure she's had a profound impact on you, and it's been a blessing to be able to have that in your life. But I was wondering if there's maybe like one or two things you could talk about how she's really had a profound impact on you and how you've approached the rest of the world because of that time.
Well, Mother Teresa was everything I'm not, and although I'm, God willing, a work in progress, but I remember when I met her, she was just everything I wasn't. She was so focused and so, Thomas Merton one time said that we're all hypocrites, but that we have a responsibility to be seekers of the truth, to be, in effect, honest hypocrites, and so when you'd be around Mother, she brought out the best in you. And she also made you confront your own hypocrisy, because you would just see that, like Peter and James, it would be up on the Mount of Transfiguration. At times to be with Mother was to be, it's good to be here with you. You had that feeling. It was just good to be with Mother. There was just a loveliness that attended her. But then you come down into the valley of the unwashed. And you have to confront your own hypocrisy. And even in religious life, this is a very painful thing for religious to confront, right? And we all think we're not hypocrites, but, it's kind of like when we drive and we cut in front of someone because we have to turn right there, and we go, oopsie, And then when someone does that, you idiot, you're cutting in front of me, can't you drive? And it's just kind of the standard that we hold ourselves to that's far different from the one we hold others to. And so I think Mother helped infuse a seriousness to my spiritual journey. To realize, Mother used to say, Jesus said, my love for you is no joke. Now, I've never seen that in Scripture. But it's true, He must have said it, But this isn't a joke. That this life, and I when I met her, I was so ready for something authentic, and she was so authentic and real. She was the most Mary-like person since Mary, and she was so focused and cheerful and alive and caring. She was the full deal. And so that was one thing. And I think the second impact she had on me was she introduced me to my wife. Her mission. Mary and I met in one of her missions in her AIDS home. And hidden in my meeting with Mother were those 5 kids and my wife. And that's kind of extraordinary to ponder that a little tiny meeting in Calcutta in 1985, and hidden in that moment through the infinite mercy of God were my wife and 5 children. Extraordinary. So those were the 2 that come to mind quickly. But I can't, I'm feeling like the guy that has a huge debt, credit card debt, and I'm just trying to pay off some of the interest. The debt I have having met Mother, trying to repay it back some. And coming to conferences like this, it's a privilege to come and talk about Mother. It's not about me, it's for sure. My wife would want time for rebuttal, No, I'm kidding.
Andrew, go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction. Mr. Towey, I am Andrew Weiss, a student at Holy Cross College. And my question is, through Mother Teresa's recognition of loneliness, as through her direct recognition of loneliness and her experience of darkness, and her example of providing that love and friendship for those people who need it, how can we as Christians follow her example and be that friend to those people who need it for their benefit and perhaps even for our own benefit to kind of fulfill our own loneliness? And I ask this question, in the context of being a quote-unquote busy young adult in this culture that more promotes, the new ideas in a way of kind of putting down old ideas and even older people and their ideas. So.
Well, Mother always talked about, if I hadn't picked up that first person in the gutter, I wouldn't have, we wouldn't have had tens of thousands of people at Calcutta die and go home to God with dignity and peace. So I think she was a big believer in doing what you could do. And, she used to say, what I do is a drop in the ocean, but the ocean's better for the drop. And so I think a lot of times people are so intimidated by, how can I help this homeless person who's mentally ill? I don't have any professional training. I can't fix them. They probably won't be fixed. Why bother? And Mother would say, smile at them. And I think it was nurtured through prayer that you recognize that those little things might lead to other things. And it was ultimately God's problem to guide you in His holy will into how you were to respond with charity to those around you. And it does change you. When I look at the debt I have, I lived in an AIDS home for about a year. And when I think of the debt I have to those men and women that I knew as they died, extraordinary how they enrich our lives. So I think Mother would always urge people to do something, a little. If you're going to pray, people go, I can't do adoration. Well, then start with 5 minutes. See what happens. Stay after Mass a little bit. Spiritual reading, just in other words, don't sit there and say, gee, I can't do what Mother Teresa did. I can't do 2 hours of adoration and prayer and all this, Well, start a little bit. Do the little and just see what happens. See what the Lord does.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Elliot Pierce. I'm a student here at Notre Dame. And my question, well, just to start off a little bit, is that you mentioned how Mother Teresa's vocation in life to go to Calcutta and to minister to these, terribly poor people there was in many ways ridiculous for a woman to do in 1946. And I'm sure she didn't. I'm sure she didn't just wake up one morning and going from 0 to 60. I'm Teresa of Albania to I'm going to live in Calcutta for the rest of my life and just minister to these poor people, and that's going to be it. And how does one get on the path towards discovering their vocation, whatever it may be? And it may not necessarily be something as radical as radical in the eyes of the world as what Mother Teresa did, but I know everyone has something that they're called to that they can't even imagine, and it's hard for us to get from where we are now to that point. And I feel like a lot of us young people in college could use a little help getting started on that path.
Right? Is Danielle Rose here? Is Danielle here? She's not here. She and I were talking about this last night. She's now here at Notre Dame. She's a treasure if you ever hear her sing. Discerning the will of God, obviously, people have written tomes on this, on the art of discernment, spiritual direction. I can only speak from my own experience, as flawed as it is. And also from my observation of Mother's life. Mother knew early on what she was going to do. She knew that she was going to be a missionary nun. And then she spoke so she gets over to India and she teaches math and geography for 16 years. And it's worth pondering what those 16 years entailed. Here she was in this cloistered environment, surrounded by walls in the Entally neighborhood, very poor area of Calcutta. But inside, it was a little island of privilege for the privileged kids of India to send their kids. Privileged families of India to send their kids. And so she was teaching geography and history to students, and then she became head mistress of the school. But she was looking out her window where her dormitory, where the Loretta nuns were, out on the slums, and the Lord was stirring. And for 16 years, she was watching all that, and she'd slowly start getting some poor kids in the school. And when all the chaos descended on India at the time of partitioning of India, the time of Gandhi, dead bodies were being thrown over the wall of the convent. She was having to go outside where there were dead bodies all over the street trying to get rice for the kids. It was a tremendous time, and so she was just, the Lord took those 16 years to form her. A lot of people want to have an answer right away, and in fact, he was forming her to hunger to what he ultimately then revealed in what she called a call within a call. For me, in my own experience, and I think it was validated somewhat by Mother, is that she didn't use this expression, but I often saw that she would propose people connect the dots in front of them. What has God placed in front of you, and spend some time connecting these relationships and individuals and what your own sentiments are, where you're feeling led. So it's, to me, I think that the last thing I'll say about that too is, Mother Teresa one time said to me, she goes, "You should pray this prayer. Jesus, use me without consulting me." And in the discernment of the will of God, there's often a strong element of that we are used without knowing that we're being used. And that's okay. That's okay. The little flower used to talk about the rubber ball, and it was up to Jesus if he wanted to pick it up or chuck it, or, that sometimes you are in the will of God and not aware fully that you're thinking that it's somewhere out there, and it's like Jesus is saying, no, the kingdom's at hand now. So I think a prayer life is absolutely essential, and I would just, as you discern the will of God, and I think contact with the poor, very important. They often are the means and instruments of communicating the will of God in your life. Especially when I see politicians, I wish, and I've been around politics a lot, you'd love to see them more hands-on with the poor.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Judy Hutchinson from Notre Dame. Sadly, my student days are over. But being here, I've had the opportunity to hear some amazing speakers, and now yourself included. Nothing compares, though, to years ago being in a prayer breakfast in New Orleans and in the same room as Mother Teresa. I can't tell you what she said anymore, but that impacted me, as I'm sure those who have had that same experience could say. The talk that you gave talked about why her influence now is just beginning. My concern, being a pessimist, is that there she was among us, and when she was here, she could not be ignored, as little as she was. Now with the breakdown of the family, both here on institutional levels in Europe, with kind of the vehement opposition that Benedict received in his trip to the UK and to Spain. And the first time I saw something I never thought I'd see was derogatory comments about her in writing by the leader of the atheist thinkers.
Right.
I never thought I'd see that. My concern is that because she's not here, she's becoming a quaint figure of the past for those that didn't have that opportunity to see her in person and to experience her. What would you say to that?
Well, I truly, in our understanding of what the Church has taught about the communion of saints, I feel Mother is here, and in some ways is even more present than she was in her natural lifetime. But I think you're identifying. I remember when I would address the freshman students at St. Vincent, and I would say, "How many of you have heard of Mother Teresa?" And here, this is a Catholic college, and less than half the hands would go up because they were 6 or 7 years old when she died. And unfortunately in our culture, when you look at the 20th century and you had these towering giants of John Paul II and Mother Teresa, each working in a different part of the vineyard, but together as friends, it's one of the most beautiful stories. And I think in the future, when the Church speaks of this era, they will speak of the two together and the different roles that they played, complementary roles they played, how the Church was using them. But if you look at freshmen coming into Notre Dame, they will know less about John Paul II and Mother Teresa than about Lady Gaga and Alejandro. Mm-hmm. So that's the challenge on educational institutions like this, is to avail them of the treasures of the Church. Particularly when you look at the focus on women and women leadership. Mother Teresa is a model, I think, for having pioneered against the most improbable odds and against tremendous resistance within the Church and outside of the Church, within government and outside of government, persevering as she forged this incredible work through the grace of God. So, to me, that's why I want to commend Dave Solomon for having this center and its ongoing relevance in the life of the Church and in shaping our culture. There's so many people, and I run into a lot of very devout Catholics who all want to flee the culture because it's a shipwreck. And Mother Teresa would not support that. She wants you to engage it and change it and go find a little corner, And I remember that she was asked at the end of her life, don't you get frustrated for every 50 people that, for every person you pick up, there's still 50 people out there dying all alone. You've been doing this for decades. Nothing's changed. Don't you get discouraged? And she said, no, God doesn't call me to be successful. God calls me to be faithful. And it's a reminder for anyone in working in the new evangelization not to fall into the trap of measuring success by numbers of conversions or by great speech. All this, it's a question of fidelity. Fidelity to what is God asking of you. It's not a measurement, is my budget bigger than this center's budget, or do I have more staff, or do I have... No. The question is the quality of the engagement, and are you challenging, are you inspiring young people to come and see? When Jesus, those great words, what are you looking for? That should be posted over every university's gate. Those words of Jesus in the first chapter of John. What are you looking for? And Notre Dame, or any Catholic college, shouldn't be indifferent to that question. They should care about the eternal dimension of their journey. They should want them to make their career goal to get to heaven. And they might be a doctor, and they might be this, and you can't coerce it, you can't force it, but there has to be a sense of shared mission and a belief that we are vested in your eternal salvation, Catholic or not, as the students. Welcome them all, but that we're not indifferent, that we are desirous of that growth, the plenitude of life, the fullness of grace. This should be the invitation that's for every student here. And I think Mother Teresa, if we have people teaching about her and availing them of, her words, and what she had to say in her life, I think future generations will come to discover her greatness, much like the little flower after her death. She dies in 1897. She's canonized in 1925. That was hyper speed back then. Mother may be canonized not too long from now. So.
I think we can perhaps squeeze one more question in. So, Doctor?
Thank you. Just one quick point. As a cardiologist, I once asked her, Mother, how can I be a better physician? Because I was constantly trying to tap her wisdom and learning as a child with the master. And her response, a medical ethics course, it would take us a year to talk to our residents and interns how to be better physician. I think her genius was she can sum up questions, responses in one-liners. That was her genius. And she said, well, Dr. Paul, don't ever forget who you're touching. And I thought that was so breathtakingly beautiful to me, because if you realize you're touching humanity and Christ within that humanity, you'll always be a great physician. You'll always be a compassionate physician. And one other quick note, because she did have a beautiful sense of humor. After that, she asked me, Dr. Paul, how often do you pray? And I said, because she always liked to trick you, too, little jokes. And I knew it was a trick question. So I said, well, Mother, are you talking about like on Sundays or weekdays? When you're working, what do you do? So I thought to myself, I better impress her how busy I am during the day so she knows why I don't pray all day. I said, well, I do heart catheterizations in the morning, and I do emergencies in the afternoon. I go to the office and see patients, and I make rounds with the hospital. She said, no. She said, but why do you do those things? And I said, well, I want to satisfy hospital administration, and there's a financial issue, and I want to be compassionate to my physicians. I'm already starting to sweat now. And she said, I'm going to teach you, since you don't pray during the day, how to pray the work. She said, next time before you go into a patient's room, I want you to pick up the chart, and I want you to clear your mind of everything in your mind, your family, finances, politics, hospital administration. All I want you to do is give yourself to that patient.
Yeah.
She love that patient and focus purely on alleviating the suffering of that patient. That's what Mother calls praying the work.
Right.
So your whole life and whole day can be a prayer as long as you're agapically self-giving to your patients. And I thought that was breathtaking and beautiful. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. You know, when you say how she could summarize with such simplicity deep theological realities, one that comes to mind, which I'll close with because I'm here on the campus of Our Lady, is her Marian doctrine, which she neatly summarized as follows: no Mary, no Jesus.
Very good. Well, join me, please, in thanking Jim Towey for his wonderful remarks. Thank you very much.